Okay, hi. So today I'm going to be talking about my favorite nonfiction reads of 2022. So I don't read a ton of nonfiction. Nonfiction in 2022 made up 17% of my reading, but I generally tend to really enjoy the nonfiction I do create time for. So I have 4 that I want to talk about today, and one of these is I normally don't rank these, and this is not a ranked video, but one of these is by far my favorite, so that's the one I'm going to talk about last. So we will talk about a very popular one this year, came out in 2022, and that is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. So this is a celebrity memoir in which Jennette McCurdy, who was a child star on mainly Nickelodeon, but in other things too, kind of talks about her relationship with her mother and her relationship with fame and her relationship with food. Each chapter is very short and succinct and not necessarily completely chronological, but told in such a way where it does have almost a narrative kind of feel to it, even though it is more of an essay collection. I think that when I've read a decent number of celebrity memoirs, and the problem that you can get with them is that they can be poorly written because celebrities are not necessarily writers, so you can't really expect them to be great at a bunch of things. Which is not a problem here. She is a good writer. I found the writing very compelling. I found it authentic. I listened to this as an audiobook, so I listened to her speak it. But even if I hadn't, I feel like it was a solidly written memoir. The other thing that you get with celebrity memoirs is that they can just feel a bit shallow because there's things that people want to keep private in their life. They live in the public eye. They go to interviews. They get asked a lot of questions. There are things that they don't want to talk about. There are things that they can't talk about. She does not abide by that at all. She delves very deep into the dynamics of her relationship with her mother and the toxicity in that, and the way she felt about it as a child, and the way she felt about it when her mom died, and her coping mechanisms with that, and her realization over time of how toxic her relationship was. She talks about becoming an adult and the slightly inappropriate relationships that she has, and the ones that kind of just appear at large with young teenage freshly 18-year-old women, and how there is some sort of preying that happens there. And then she talks about kind of how all of this kind of synchronized into her having to combat and deal with a intense eating disorder. I found her authenticity throughout this very refreshing. It was really interesting I found it interesting to see how it is to be a child star. It's something that children grow up on. I watched Jennette McCurdy on iCarly when I was young, and you don't really give much consideration to the life that those kids are living, but content for children is a huge market, and it's not pleasant to a lot of the kids within it. So I thought that was well worth the hype. Okay, so then the next 2 ones I want to talk about are more historic nonfiction. So the first one is Medical Apartheid. This is a dark read, so I guess the other one is too. I think you have to be kind of prepared for the amount of really terrible things that you're going to read about that have been done to the Black body through time in the United States. It's very extensive, and it's in the time period it's looking at, from slavery to present, and the treatment of Black people in the medical system, testing on bodies, manipulation of bodies, treatment of people's deceased bodies, treatment of their live bodies. I find that for me personally, it's hard to read a history of something when the scope is so broad. When you reduce the history to something a bit smaller within the context of the history of the United States, to the history of Black Americans within the United States, to the history of how the Black body is treated within the medical system, like for me, like personally, that's a lot more palatable, where I feel like it's like one topic we're kind of delving into that I can see chronologically. So just how it was told, and the scope it chose to take is something that really works for me personally. And it's just one of those books that I read where there were some things that I already knew, and there were a lot of things that I didn't. And growing up in the United States, and knowing the pieces of the history that you are provided in the classroom and through the lens you are provided them, it's just things that you should know. Like, these are the things that I read in this book are things that all Americans should know occurred. Okay, so the next one I want to talk about, along a similar vein, it's Our History is the Future by Nick Estes. So this kind of, instead of going from the past and going into the present, this kind of starts in the present to contextualize you into the past. So the subtitle is Standing Rock versus the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Long Tradition of Indigenous Resistance. So that's where it starts. Standing Rock versus the Dakota Access Pipeline. This is something that most Americans know about, since it's more of like a modern, like current event. It takes place all in like South Dakota area. So graphically, it's like a little bit smaller in scope. But it kind of just walks you through different indigenous resistances that have happened through time, and how indigenous resistance, like our history, is the future, and just indigenous resistance to colonial pressures, to the stealing of lands, to the destruction of resources, is something that is continuously happening and is something that will keep happening. And it contextualizes it in those specific moments in time. And then it also delves a little bit into indigenous resistance on a global scale. So overall, I thought it was like a clever way to structure that thesis, I guess, or that like the information, and I would recommend it. My last one, my favorite of the year, Bad Blood by JohnCarreyrou. So I read this in February. I made a video about why you should read it. I will link to that video because it's been a while since I read it. And I think that I'll give more details there. But this is the story of Elizabeth Holmes, who has been in the news recently because her and her partner, Sonny, with the company Theranos, have now been tried and found guilty. So this is about a Silicon Valley startup that was trying to create this brand new med device, and just how it was never there. The technology literally never existed. But Elizabeth Holmes specifically conned very wealthy people into putting money into her company. So it's so well written. It's written in a way where it reads like a thriller. It is crazier than a lot of things that I've read in fictional thrillers, but it is real life. These are the things that happened. JohnCarreyrou is originally the journalist that broke the story of Theranos, and so he has a lot of the great insights. He was interviewing people at the time, so it's just like how not to run a company. It talks about that, like just the structure of the company, how people were treated, all the NDAs, like people being followed outside of work, it being scary to quit, all of that. And then there's like the legality of it, how they were like just dismissing this idea of the need for regulatory bodies, how they put product into the world, testing processes into the world for blood testing that never worked, and people, like real patients, were getting incorrect results, and the impacts of that. And then just like the wealthy people who just kept giving money to this company that truly didn't really exist in the way everyone thought they did. They had contracts with Walgreens. It's wild. It is absolutely wild. This is just such a wild read, and I recommend it to everyone. Working in an adjacent field to this, I recommended it to so many coworkers who read it and are like, what the hell was that? That is crazy. So if you work in like the medical field at all, I recommend it. If you like thrillers, but you also like nonfiction, I recommend it. Like if you want a fast-paced, interesting read, I recommend it. Literally can't think of a person I wouldn't recommend it to. So that was probably like my favorite read of 2022. Like, even of my fiction and nonfiction, that was probably like the highlight of my reading. But anyway, that is all I got for this video. Let me know what your favorite nonfictions were of 2022 or ones that you're planning to get to in 2023. And that is all I got. So until next time, happy reading.